the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
There are only two who've done it. It was Alabama, and I think maybe
I want to say it was
USC.
USC, I believe. Yeah, the last time, or those are the last two times. But yeah, it's a strange world to be in. What if you combine the coaches and the AP? It's about 130 first place, or 130 voters or so, and about 121 of them voted Georgia number one. So just the unanimous, just about number one in terms of as unanimous as it usually gets in the preseason. It's a crazy time to be alive for Georgia football fans for sure. 11.5 is obviously a really high number, but they've had two consecutive undefeated regular seasons. And just looking at, like, I think you go back to 2021 and 2022, like most people didn't see Arkansas being a top 10 undefeated team when they came into Athens. Most people didn't see Kentucky being a 7-0, 8-0 team, top 10 coming into Athens. Most people didn't see Tennessee being the number one team in the country coming into Athens in 2022. So there's a chance some of these teams on the schedule overachieve, and the schedule isn't quite as just cupcake filled as it looks right now. That they're definitely missing that Oklahoma game in Norman, what would be week 2 of the season. But you just look at the schedule, and I just don't know how many teams on the schedule can really challenge Georgia. Like, I think Tennessee in Knoxville is definitely the most dangerous scenario. You look at the teams that have given Georgia trouble in the last few years, like you look at C.J. Stroud and Ohio State. You look at what Bryce Young did in 2021. Like, I mean, I guess you could count what Missouri and Kentucky did against Georgia last year, but those almost feel like hiccups. Like that wasn't Georgia playing at their best, right? It felt like Alabama and Ohio State truly got Georgia's best shot and scored a lot of points on them in big games the last 2 seasons. Joe Milton is really the only guy. I mean, I guess you can include Devin Leary as a guy who can be a potential first-round pick. But there's just a lot of, I mean, the weapons that Alabama and Ohio State also had. Like, I mean, Tennessee, we know Josh Heupel can get his guys into space, but Georgia fans feel a certain way about Tennessee because of what they've done to them the past couple years, even though Tennessee's been scoring a whole bunch of points on everybody else. So Ole Miss is the team that is probably the X factor. I feel like if someone's going to surprise Georgia and be like a college game day in Athens or something, I feel like that's like the only game that could potentially be, maybe Ole Miss gets off to a 9-1 start or something like that. Like, I don't see that happening, but they're a team that's got a dynamic, offense and run pass abilities. So, something like that could happen. And I think that's the only really team I see challenging Georgia. You look at what they have returning, like, Georgia loses a lot every year. As good as Jordan Davis was, like, I think Jordan Davis is the kind of guy that's like a very tough guy to replace. They just don't make 6'7", 350 guys like that. And so that was a guy that was going to be difficult to replace. But Jalen Carter is, I think, the best defensive lineman that's ever played at Georgia and maybe ever will play at Georgia. Like, I think this guy is just truly special. Like, you just don't see interior guys rush the passer like that. Like, those are the guys that are Pro Bowlers and all pros, Hall of Famers. Like, not putting that on Jalen Carter, but he's got that type of ability. So you look at Georgia's going to lose a lot every year. They lost 15 guys to the NFL and from the 2021 team, tied Alabama with 10 last year. But Darnell Washington is the kind of guy that's like, that's a ridiculous individual that's like difficult to replace. And I look at Jalen Carter the same way. Like, Broderick Jones, like, Georgia just recruits the offensive line so well. Like, they lose Andrew Thomas and they're fine. They lose Broderick Jones and they'll probably be fine. But those are the three guys that I look at. Like, Keely Ringo's a really good player, but I trust Georgia can probably match that production at the other corner spot. Like, those are the three guys that I think are going to be the most difficult to replace because Georgia didn't necessarily have great pass rushers last year, but to have such a disruptor in the interior of the defensive line like Jalen Carter, like, that's the thing. It's going to have to be, by committee that they're going to have to replace a guy like that. But, Mykel Williams, was a 5-star, like top 5 player in the country, and he looked like an absolute stud as a true freshman. So it's like that's going to be the kind of guy that looks like a future superstar. Malachi Starks is a true freshman, looked like a superstar. Like Smile Mondon and Jamin Dumas-Johnson, that's the best linebacker duo in the country for my money. Clemson's got a good one too, but I think it feels exactly like Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker from a couple years ago. Like I just think this Georgia defense, like last year was the rebuilding year, and as crazy as that is as it sounds, like I think the defense is just going to be, maybe not back to 2021 level. That was an absurd, maybe historical defense, but I think this defense should be the best defense in the SEC and maybe the best defense in the country. The only thing that I think could derail it is if the quarterback play isn't what it needs to be. But I think with the weapons you have, Brock Bowers is still on this team. I've been talking about Georgia for too long to not mention Brock Bowers, best player in college football for my money. So I think Carson Beck is going to, Stetson, I think, as good as he is, and I think some people, you could replace a guy like that. What he did off schedule and scrambling and making something out of nothing, I think that's ultimately like going to be remembered as like Stetson's legacy. Is like just that dual threat that could make something happen when something went wrong. And I think if Carson Beck, he's got some mobility, and maybe Georgia's offensive line and just things are just going to be so much better and so much more on schedule that maybe you don't need that quarterback that's getting out of things. But I think if Carson Beck, and I think it's got to be Carson Beck. I don't see any way that obviously Vandergriff, I think from what they've said, has gotten a lot of they're getting a lot of first team reps. But I think Beck is the guy, and I think Georgia's offense shouldn't miss a beat. I mean, there's people that obviously want to talk about Mike Bobo replacing Todd Monken, and that's definitely a story. But man, Mike Bobo never had the kind of offensive line that he's got right now when he was previously at Georgia, and he never had the kind of defense that Georgia has right now. Like stealing something from the Dogs on 3 podcast, I forget what it's called, but they said and even this is how I feel as a Georgia fan. Like what is the Mike Bobo moment you remember the most? Is there one that like stands out? Because most people have like a specific one that stands out. I'm just going to say it. It's the 2014 South Carolina game at South Carolina when you had first and goal or whatever, and you didn't give it to Todd Gurley, who was the best player in college football at the time. It was a play action. It got whatever, and they called it intentional grounding on Hudson Mason. Settled for a field goal, then missed like a 25-yard field goal. Georgia scored 35 points in that game that you're blaming on the offensive coordinator, right? 35 points in Williams-Brice Stadium against a really good South Carolina program at the time. So it's the fact, like, if Mike Bobo's scoring 35 points, Georgia's winning every time for the most part with what they have on defense right now. So I don't make much of like the Mike Bobo Todd Monken like storyline. I think Monken's like maybe the best Georgia's ever had, but I think with what they have established, I don't think they miss a beat offensively.
It is interesting because both fan bases, like Alabama and Georgia, are betting on the Alabama system and the Georgia system, which is interesting to me. Like nobody else does this. I don't hear this anybody else that just is like, well, they're running the system. It's like what does that even mean? Like you have your just own system and you're hiring offensive coordinators to keep doing the same thing, and it's like I don't necessarily believe that. I'm sure there's a lot of crossover, but it's still the guys pressing the right buttons at the right times, because Kirby's not doing that. Like it's not going to be Kirby. It's still going to be Mike Bobo in high pressure situations. Maybe that's Tennessee. Maybe it's Ole Miss. Maybe it's Mizzou again. Maybe I don't know who it is. Maybe it's Florida. If Florida's pesky, maybe it's them. Point being, at Auburn, that's another possibility. We'll see what they look like at Auburn. I think the biggest thing to me with Georgia and 11.5, the thing about them is this is far more exciting and interesting than they've been in several years now. I think that's the thing I'm looking forward to most with Georgia. Like Dominic Lovett, how does it work with him and Ladd McConkey and like a deeper wide receiver room? Do they rotate? Does Ra Thomas even make an impact? Is there a drop off from not having Darnell and what he did in the blocking game? Kendall Milton still hurt and still missing a lot of time. Are we sure they're going to get something out of Kendall Milton? I think when people talk about Georgia and running the damn ball and stuff like that, I'm curious what that looks like this year. Do they have a drop off because they have to just throw different guys at the problem and try and figure out? I think that might be a little overblown just because of where college football has gone. Is just even from the Todd Gurley days, it's just changed so much. Like Tennessee's going to run three backs. It's going to be Sampson. It's going to be Jalen Wright. It's going to be Jawari Small. They'll rotate. That's just how it is. I think Georgia will rotate. And the days of just the guy getting 30 carries and you just rely on one guy to get you over the top, I think those are mostly gone. Even 1-2 punch, I think, is mostly gone, especially when you go to expanded college playoff format and all that. You want to conserve your guys. So I think that might be a little bit overblown, but Jalen Carter was a world breaker. Jordan Davis was a world breaker. They have talent. They have 5 stars and blue chippers on the interior, but it's not the same. Like, based on everything I've seen, there's not that just game wrecker on in the interior that is going to immediately, there's nothing you can do. The guys that you're just kind of screwed no matter what. You can throw whoever at the problem, you're not going to fix it. Maybe there's some issues at corner. They've been banged up a little bit there. There's some new faces. Safety spots will be good. Linebackers, you should never worry about Georgia with linebackers. And I think that's enough to be like, oh, and then throw in the fact that Stetson really settled in last year and had this supreme command of the offense, similar to Tennessee, where Hendon Hooker just knew exactly where everything needed to be, was just a machine. I think, look, there's some differences with Carson, Beck, and Joe Milton, but they're two guys that have been in the system for a long time now, that have learned how to play quarterback at Georgia and Tennessee for a long time now, and have waited for their opportunity. Both have a lot of pressure riding on them, because I think you see a lot of Georgia fans that are like, well, they should be better. Like, Carson Beck's bigger. He's a prototypical passer. He should actually put up better numbers than Stetson. He should be a better prospect than Stetson. So I'm curious to see how he handles that, because Stetson was so good running what Monken ran that I think the expectations are kind of scary high if you're a Georgia fan with Carson, because we've never seen it. Like, this is all brand new, and there's a lot of change, and you don't have Monken, and the running back room might take a couple weeks to get sorted out, but when you have the offensive line and the blue chippers they do on defense, they'll figure it out. They'll win probably minimum 11 games in the regular season. But when it comes to the 11.5, Matt Green, I have to take the under, because it's just, we're in uncharted waters to get to 12-0 3 straight years in the regular season. Like, that's just, until I see it, I can't do it. Now, I'm not saying they're going 9-3, 7-5, which Kirby Smart would prefer. People say that they're going 75. But right now,
always doubting them.
I'm saying 11-1. I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's Tennessee. I wouldn't bet on Tennessee today. But we've seen them be gettable. The Missouri game was one, obviously. Maybe it's Auburn. That's the Missouri road game for this year. Like, Hugh Freeze just out of the gate, just pull something out of the hat, and it wakes Georgia up in a way where it's like, whoa, okay, we're not walking into 12-0 like we did the last 2 years. I don't know. I think it's all very interesting.
And I think that's a good call. I think Auburn might be the most dangerous game on this whole schedule, because it's in week 5. Like, I feel like whatever Georgia is and they've established, by the 11th game against Tennessee, obviously Tennessee, I think, is going to be a better team than Auburn this year. But whatever they are, I just think Georgia's going to just have their identity, have it figured out. The offense will be, in mid-season, late-season form. Like, I think Auburn there's a chance, like, this is Beck's first road start of his career. Like, there's a chance this just, maybe they block a punt or something, and that crowd just gets going, and then it's like, who knows, things can snowball in a rowdy atmosphere. So I think that's a good call with Auburn. September 30th, I think that's a dangerous spot, because Hugh Freeze, who knows with Hugh Freeze, the ultimate wild card.
So what are you doing? Are you going over on Georgia, or are you going under?
I think I got to go with third straight undefeated regular season, to be honest. I don't see Tennessee being necessarily, I mean, I want to, spoil my prediction with Tennessee, but I just think this Georgia team, it's like they're going to be loaded again, man. Like I know Jim Harbaugh's talking about this Michigan team breaking Georgia's NFL draft record. It's like, this Georgia team could break Georgia's NFL draft record. Like, they're going to put so many dudes in the league. But I think you made a good point. Like, as far as the running back position goes, I think Branson Robinson has missed some time this offseason. So, like, Kendall Milton has obviously had his share of injuries through 3 years. So they're going to have to get in. They're going to have a committee, and that's lots of times what we've seen out of Georgia probably these last couple years, that it's just a few different guys carrying the ball, and the running game is good enough. It's not running back like transcendent, unstoppable running game, but it's been good enough.